Lehavin, we must understand, Mipnei Mah Yom Tov the Pesach, hu b'yem she'nasa hanes. The Yom Tov of Pesach is celebrated on the same day that the miracle occurred. Ma she'ein kein b'Chanukah uPurim, as opposed to Chanukah and Purim, she'ein b'yem hamenucha, that the celebration is the day after the miracle, on the day that they rested. This is a famous question of the Alter Rebbe. And the argument is that it's a difference between the Yom Tov, the Me'adim, the Eraisa, and the Me'adim, the Rabbanan. Shavuos is the same thing. Shavuos is on the day that we got the Torah, not the day after. Pesach is on the day we left Mitzrayim, not the day after. Even though we did the Korban Pesach Erev Pesach, but we ate the Pesach at night, and at midnight of Tzav, the firstborn were killed, and we left Be'etzem Yom Hazeh midday, like it says in Sforim. Be'etzem Yom Hazeh means the middle of the day. So the question is, why are the Yom Tov that are in Torah celebrated on the day the miracle happened, and the Yom Tov that are in the Rabbanan Purim, and the same is true of Chanukah, celebrated on the day after the miracle happened? Purim, we fought a war on Yud Gimel Adar, and we fasted, and the Purim is Yudalit. In Shushan, where they fought also on Yudalid, the holiday of Purim is on Tezvav, Shushan Purim. And the same is true of Chanukah, the famous Me'iri that's brought in Likkutei Torah that Chassidus always brings. You have, of course, in the Rebbe Psyche as well, that the Me'iri holds that the victory in war was on Chavdalid. There are opinions who hold, I think it's the Rambam who holds, that the victory of war was also on Chamish of Chavhei, in which case Chanukah is not like Purim. It's, in other words, it's like the Reise. The Rebbe has a Psyche on it. The Rebbe has a moirendike Psyche where he discusses the different opinions about why Chanukah is according to some like the Reises and some like the Rabbanan. I forgot what Krach and Likkutei Torah is, but the Rebbe has a Psyche where he discusses this Rambam and this Me'iri. But according to the Me'iri, at least, the war was won on the 24th, and that's not the holiday. It's the 25th, the day after they won. So this Maamar is asking the question on Purim, and it's asking the question on Chanukah according to the opinion of the Me'iri. Why is it that the Yom Tov that are mid'oraisa, the victory of the war, the celebration of the victory is on the day that the war was won, and the Yom Tov that Rabbanan, which is Chanukah and Purim, the celebration of the victory that we had is the day after the victory. This is the Rebbe's kasha. Zog der Rebbe v'yuvam behegdim inyan mamale v'seviv. Let us explain first the concept of a Malak Alalman and Seviv Kalalman. Now, how many Maimorim have we had in the Likkutei Torah and Torah 8 over the last decade or so that these shurim are going on that ask the questions, what's the difference between Mamale and Seviv? Dozens. It happens again and again and again. It's one of those ideas that repeats itself. It's like the Derech Mitzvah, almost, not exactly. Derech Mitzvah, every Maimon explains Mamale Kalalman and Seviv Kalalman. I heard a story of the Rebbe where the Rebbe asked somebody if he knows what Derech Mitzvah, if he learned Derech Mitzvah, and when he said yes, the Rebbe said, Eibazei Veis the Muntashed, Tzivashen Mamale Kalalman and Seviv Kalalman, or the difference between Mamale and Seviv. And the whole explanation is a page. It's not very long. It's from line 4 to line 24. It's 21 lines. But the Rebbe here brings the classic Mishalim, and he brings it in other places as well. And maybe we'll use these few lines as an excuse to delve more comprehensively than we normally would into understanding Mamale and Seviv the way it's explained by the Maimorim later. In other words, not only to talk about Mamale and Seviv as it relates to Likus, but to go into the mashal. He spent some time explaining the mashal, which of course is developed by the later Rabbi and more in Chassidus. But let me start with this, okay? Before we even read these handful of lines, these 20 lines about Mamale and Seviv, let me begin with a proposal. I asked this question to my students in a lot of contexts, including the idea of Ra'yeded Milmaila, that Havaya Tzilcha, that when the Eibishter gives a person Gvuras, it's coming from Ashya Geve Sheteasenu Koch. It comes from the higher letters of Hashem's name, which is Alma Deskasya. So I would ask the students, what would you rather, truth or kindness? What would you prefer, God's truth or God's kindness? Now, if you ask that question to an adult, they won't even hesitate. Of course, kindness. Because except for those rare individuals who are serious Jews, and human beings, for whom emes is above all else, the average human being wants to be comfortable, wants his life to be peaceful and safe. So if you ask an adult, what would you rather, truth or kindness, he's going to say kindness. First of all, there are adults who would say truth, of course. We call them chassidim, emes chassidim, greis chassidim, chabad chassidim. Like you have the hayem yem, nit, as avedas Hashem da zayin mit hanemes. Not emes alein is an avoida. That means in English, not that you serve Hashem with truth, but the truth itself is a service. But for the average person, especially a noshim kerkeinu, we would be mevater of an emes zayin chesed. But teenagers are still idealists. So I'll ask my students, which would you rather, the Eibishter's kindness or the Eibishter's truth? So I'll get a significant number that will say they want the Eibishter's truth. And then we'll talk about it for a few minutes. And as we talk about it, the number of people who said truth becomes less, and the number of people who prefer kindness becomes more. The difference between truth and kindness is the Eibishter giving you what he has to give, and the Eibishter giving you what you're comfortable with receiving. That's the difference between emes and chesed. And for a person who can handle emes, there's nothing greater than emes. Paket, it's the deepest level of avodas Hashem. It's the highest achievement of a human being to have a shaykhis mit emes. The Alter Rebbe was obsessed with emes. His whole life was an avoid of emes. Everything he did had to be mit tachlis emes. That's the famous hayem yem, which says in Sof Perik, Sof Yigeres HaKedesh Beis, Le'isnaig dot b'midas emes le'yankiv. And it says in the Hayem Yem, if the Alter Rebbe would not have written those three words, b'midas emes le'yankiv, but they got 50,000 noch chassidim, another 50,000 chassidim, aber was momentan Chabad mont emes, Chabad is emes. And the Alter Rebbe's whole life was a pursuit of everything being perfect. Absolutely emes, true, honest. And I told you, come upon him the word that the Alter Rebbe tamal gesagt of sich, the Alter Rebbe said about himself, quote, of areinem emes in itoke nisnagdus, an absolute truth has no opponent, has no opposition. Dacht sich mir as mein davening as areinem emes. I think, said the Alter Rebbe, that my davening is an absolute truth. Dacht sich mir, I think, Alter Rebbe said, I think, as mein davening as areinem emes. So it says that the Alter Rebbe's davening was full of a spoilers. Alter Rebbe's davening was very passionate. In other words, if you wanted to laugh at the Alter Rebbe, there was a lot to laugh at his davening. He would pound his fist into the wall until it would bleed. He had no awareness. He would roll on the floor in dveikus. And no one criticized the Alter Rebbe's davening. Even though the Alter Rebbe was criticized by so many, in so many ways, mibayes u'mechutz, from the Misnagdim and from the Vayikanu Bayechav, it was incredible. But the Alter Rebbe's davening, nobody criticized. As the Alter Rebbe himself said, because it's areinem emes, an absolute truth, hat nish kein nisnagdus. But emes is awesome. Emes is lonely, serious, it's real. And I've also told you many times the sipur with Rebbe Hershel Zeitlin, Olav Hashalom, that his son, who unfortunately is now also Olav Hashalom, Aaron Lazer, detailed that when he was a boy, that his father took him to the Rebbe, Simchas Teda, and his father was inebriated, was quite shikir. And it was Simchas Teda morning, and the Rebbe was coming upstairs after davening, and he followed the Rebbe into his room. The Rebbe turned around and he sees him, and the Rebbe gave him one of those smiles that could melt ice. I saw recently a Sikha from the Friedrich Rebbe, where the Friedrich Rebbe writes that the Mezritcher Maggid had geschonken dem Alten Rebbe Matona. The Holy Maggid of Mezritch gave the Alten Rebbe a gift. What was that gift? A shmeichel, a smile. And I think that smile we saw by the Rebbe, you can see it in the pictures even. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, mit dem shmeichel kann ein in the Welt. With that smile you can conquer the whole world. But the Alter Rebbe didn't want to use the smile because the Alter Rebbe wanted Chabad, he wanted emes, he wanted pnimius. So Rebbe Hershel Zeitlin walks into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe sees him, and the Rebbe gives him a smile like only the Rebbe can. And the Rebbe says, Rebbe Hershel, was wilted, what would you like? So Rebbe Hershel Zeitlin says to the Rebbe, Ich will dienen dem Eibishten chotch mit a bissel emes. I want to serve Hashem at least with a little bit of emes. And he bursts into tears. He starts crying uncontrollably. His son, Aaron Lazer, couldn't understand what's there to cry about him. What kind of aveda did he do? And the Rebbe swings out his hands, kedarke ba'kedesh. And the Rebbe says to him, was a bissel emes, a sach emes. Why a little emes? A lot of emes. But in reality, we all face this challenge of emes and chesed. Now, in avodas Hashem, in our own personal service, of course, we all look for emes. But in the Eibishter's responses to our avodah, I'm not so sure we're looking for emes, we're looking for chesed. We want the Eibishter to be kind to us. We want what the Rebbe calls always tev, hanirev, hanigla, good which is visible and revealed and pleasant and sweet and comfortable. Emes hurts. The truth hurts is not just a empty adage. It's an absolute fact. It's a fact. It's a truth. The truth hurts, and not everybody wants emes. As they gate us, we'd much rather have chesed than emes, even though emes is the ultimate chesed, truth, living a life of honesty, where we're honest with the Eibishter and the Eibishter is honest with us. Is a very high madrege, but it could get kind of hot in the kitchen, as the expression is. And I mentioned to you before, the Alter Rebbe wrote Korav Osmanas Talkusa. The Alter Rebbe wrote, before he passed away, a little note, which is printed in his Igris Kedesh. It's also printed in one of the Kuntreisim that was given out by Bichovsky, Meir Sha'adim, I think, that begins at Nefesh HaShvela. Now it's printed once at Likkutei Torah, but it's in the Alter Rebbe's Igris Kedesh. And the whole content of that, Igeres HaKedesh, is from Emes and Chesed. The truth is the truth. And kindness is kindness. And the Alter Rebbe says that in this world, the Eibishter wants kindness. Elam chesed yibana. Emes omar al yivre. If you would leave the world to the judge of truth, nobody would be good enough. Hein malachav, hein begedeshav leyamin ubamalachav yosim tahala. Nobody is good enough for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not even a tzaddik and not even a malach. And if the world is going to exist, it's going to exist because the Eibishter is kind. Emes Omar Al Yivr, the Medrash says, truth says, don't create a world, no man will ever be able to achieve the truth that you aspire for, wish for. And Chesed Omar Yivr, kindness said to create. The Eibishter created a world, Elam Chesed Yibana. So the Alter Rebbe discusses at length how we would rather have Chesed versus Emes. But it's still a rhetorical question. It's a question that asks itself. You want the truth or you want kindness? The truth hurts. And the reward for the truth is a life of truth. The kindness is soothing and it's forgiving and it's generous. But it allows us to be less than honest with ourselves. And that's the challenge of chesed versus emes. In an interesting kind of way, that's the difference between Maamar Lehavin and Seviv Kalam. Maamar Lehavin is chesed. The Eibishter gives you what you can get. Seviv Kalam is emes. The Eibishter gives you what the Eibishter has to give. When the Eibishter gives you what the Eibishter has to give, it doesn't settle in you, it's overwhelming to you. And this is one of the many different ways you can explain the difference between Maamar Lehavin and Seviv Kalam. So let's begin to read. Now I'm going to read the entire page. Bli neder. We have the ideas Lamaila, and then you have a moshel of Kechas and Nefesh and Ratzon. And then we'll have our shmuas. After we learn the page, we'll have our conversation. Says the Rebbe v'yuvam behegdim. Let's preface first inyan mamali v'seviv. The difference between the offering that comes from Hashem to the world, which is called mamali, and the meaning of the word mamali is revealed, and the light which the Eibishter gives to the world, which is called seviv. And the meaning of the word seviv, it says in Tanya Perik Memchas in chapter 48, means hidden. It doesn't mean surround, because there's no space in Ruchnius. It means hidden. And you and I have discussed over the years a number of times the difference between the word mamale, which means revealed, and the word seviv, which means hidden. And I have my 3 rules of revelation. This is how I teach it, right? 3 rules of revelation. Number 1, the first rule of revelation is that it reaches a reveli. You can't have a gila unless it's to somebody. If it's a gila, it's to somebody else. And number 2, they receive it. If I give you something and you don't understand what I'm saying and you haven't received what I gave, you haven't given anything. Not I haven't given anything to you, I haven't given anything, I've wasted it. Which leads to number 3. And the number 3 is that when you give to somebody else, and the point of giving that they should receive, who determines how much or how little is going to be given? And the answer is not the giver, but the receiver. The makabel determines how much you could give, because you can't give what they cannot get. Those are the 3 rules of Gilui. Number 1, it has to be El Azulas. Number 2 has to be Niskabel El Azulas. And number 3, it's according to the limitations of Azulas. That's what Maamar Lehavin is. How much does the Eibishter give us? As much as we can get. And if there's 1,000 us's, and each one has a different capacity to receive, the Eibishter gives each one something distinct, and that's the meaning of Mamale Kol Aman, revealed to each world and each person and each creation and each keli according to its capacity. And Seviv is the opposite, right? Seviv is the Eibishter gives to the world, but he's not reckoning with the world's capacity to receive. He's giving based on his capacity to give, which is infinite, which is Ein Sev. So therefore, everybody receives the same thing. And the one who determines how much we receive is not us, but the Eibishter. But we don't reveal it in a way of Gilui, we receive it in a way of Helam, as we're going to see momentarily. And that's the difference between Mamale and Seviv, as you and I, as we here in these classes, have discussed this discussion over the years, Kama v'Kama Piyama. So the Rebbe says on line 5, Mamale Pirush, the meaning of the revealed light is Eir v'Chayis, light and life. Hanimshach madrega madrega, which is drawn gradually from step to step. First of all, Elam Neshamis, the world of Neshamis, which is basically Elam Abri. V'achakach Malachim, then you have the world of Malachim, which is basically the world of Yitzir. Acharimishach be'Elam Hazeh Agashmi, till it comes on into the physical world. And then, of course, within the physical world itself, there's a number of steps. There's the Elam HaGalgalim, and there's a variety of different levels. Sharei Neida, it's known that in this physical universe that we receive Chayes Mikabla Me'ayin Sarim from the 70 Malachim who oversee El Mazah Gashmi. Vasarim Mikablim and Amalach, the 70 Malachim who oversee the earth receive from higher Malachim that are Gaveim Al Gaveim Shalav, higher and higher still. And it's all a series of systematic and gradual steps of Hashpah from a higher level to a lower level. So a Malach is very personalized. Malach Alaman reaches us according to our abilities to receive, and it's gradual. Avala Seviv is different. What is Seviv? Who Bechina said Vachayis, it's light and life. She'ein nimshach al yedei hadraga, doesn't come down through gradualism. Mizel zeh from step to step. Alakulam kiechat Seviv Kalam reaches all the worlds equally. Now notice that in both paragraphs, both on line 5 and then again on line 8, he says 2 words, Eid and Chayis. Now, you may know this from our learning, but Eid and Chayis really is Seviv Mamale. Eid is Seviv and Chayis is Mamale. And the reason is because Eid is Me'ein Amoed, light reflects the source. And Chayis is Lahachayis, life is for the sake of the one who's giving life to. So in the word Chayis, there's a connotation, there is an intent about who's receiving the Chayis. And in Eid, there's a connotation, there's an intent about from where the light is coming. So in general, Eid would be Seviv and Chayis would be Mamali, and yet he uses both terms in both instances, and I'm sure there's ways of explaining it. And now the Rebbe continues on line 10. Al derech mashal, for example, benefesh. Let's talk about the human psyche. If you want to understand Mamalik Laman in a person, and you want to understand Seviv Laman in a person, analyze what happens within the human experience and the human body and the human life. There's 2 different types of life that flow from the neshama to the guf, from the spirit of the person to the consciousness of the person and to the life of the person. And they are the following. Aleph, number 1. Hanimshach madrega madrega. Life comes from the neshama to the conscious person in steps, gradualistic steps. Miseichel midas, from the mind to the heart. Midas machshav, from the heart to the thought. Machshav al dibum, thought to speech. V'chulu, and then of course from speech to action. So there's a notion that the higher level of the neshama comes to the lower level of the neshama through a constraint, through what we call in our culture a tzimtzum. And if the higher level of the neshama comes to the lower level of the neshama through a tzimtzum, then the highest level also has to be mitzumtzum, has to be limited. Because if the highest level is infinite, there is no gradualism, there is no step-by-stepism from infinity to finitude, from bli gavul to gvul. So the fact that this first idea of chayis goes from a higher level to a lower level shows that even in the beginning of Seder Ishtalshalus, the Mamalak Alam and Chayis, this first Chayis is already limited, and that's why it becomes limited further as it goes through the chain. Ve'habeis, the second kind of life or light that a human being has, Hameir al kulam kiechad, it's a light which radiates or shines on the totality of a person, is in the totality of a person, all the faculties of the person, all the aspects of the person as one. And Shaleya Adam Shachad, this does not pass through a draw, a process of behadraga mizelaza, of gradualism from one to the next. So there's 2 types of life. There's a level of life that comes from the neshama to the consciousness of the person, in a gradual way, step by step, and the level that comes from the subconscious to the consciousness of the person, which comes as a force, which is a mashal for save of kalam. V'hu, what is this? And we see that when a person has a will in his mind, in his brain, that have a certain influence on the foot of the person, the foot will respond instantaneously, miyad, right away, almost instantaneously. And this idea you have Barichas in the beginning of Tanya Perek Chav Gimel, where he talks about Ramach Evinim Inamach Pikud Inamach Evin in the Malka, because it's the Levush Harishin. And here the Alter Rebbe talks about the idea of the bittel of the guf teratz. Mebli shehi azman ma, without any time passing, yumshach bo ha'adam min hameach, until it draws down a ray from the brain, al yedei ishtalshalos, keseder hamadreges, that goes through a chain reaction of steps according to the order of the steps, hainu behechre, because it is forced, mipnei ha'aras hameach meir ba, because when this light of the brain reaches the foot, it's shalaya de adragezu. It's not going through this gradualism. It's not happening in a step-by-step way. It's happening, in effect, in a forced way. And what forces it? The will of the person. And it happens spontaneously. It happens instantaneously. Now, this last idea, deserves more time, more of our attention. But we're going to leave it alone. So the Rebbe now continues, just like in the Koiches HaNefesh, the two different types of faculties, one that happens gradually and one that happens by force. And I'm going to be talking about this at length. The same is true, Lamaila. Memale Kalalman, what is Memale Kalalman? Ha'ora, it's a light, Shebabachin is Gili, which is revealed. And I already told you that Revelation has three rules. Number one, it reaches the Makabel. Number two, the Makabel receives it. And number three, the Makabel determines the maximum. It's based on his limitation. And is drawn then according to the order of the steps of Seder Ishtal Shalaz, regarding which the pasuk says, the world is full of Eibishter's glory, and Kvedi is Ziv Yikari, Hanaziv v'chulu. The two words that you have to understand in the psukim that are going to be mentioned now is the word kaved and the word ani. Ani goes in the Eibishter himself, or in the language of my introduction, ani means the Eibishter's emes. And kaved means a lavush, a garment, which goes on Mamalik Alalman, which goes on a ha'or. So this pasuk, Molik Alaris Kevede, is Mamalik Alalman. Of course, it says in Maamar Lehavin Mipnei Mah, it says in Likkutei Torah, that's why it says Molik Kol Ha'aretz, it doesn't say Shamayim V'aretz. Because kaved means Mamalik Alalman, and Mamalik Alalman is different from one world to another. So since we're speaking about a Oire, Mamalik Alalman, it speaks only about one world, Molik Kol Ha'aretz. Avala Seiv, as opposed to Seiv, Hu Sheinim is Galamamish, it's not revealed. Not that it's not revealed that we don't know it, but that it doesn't make adaptations for us. The Eibishter's light shines with force, as opposed to adaptation. The power of Elokus reaches the world and pushes it. It doesn't change the world. It doesn't enter into the world in a way of pnimi. It's simply stronger than the world. It doesn't happen gradually. And when it comes to save of kalam, everything is equal. Nishamis, Malachim, Ruchnis, Gashmis, Afilu Klipis, everything is the same. And he brings the other pasuk, as the pasuk says, Es HaShamayim, Es HaAretz, Ani Malei, that you mentioned both Shamayim and Aretz. Because when you're talking about a gili of Seiv of Kalam is equally in Shamayim and equally in Aretz. And you use the word Ani. And Ani means Mehusei Vatzmusi Yisbarach, the Eibishter himself, that is Molei HaShamayim Va'aretz, B'Shava Mamish, he reveals himself in heaven and earth in a way that's equal. So we learned a page about Mamali and Seviv. What's unusual about this Maimon, I'm not going to say there's no other Maimon like this in Likkutei Torah, but in Maamar of the later Rabbeim, this becomes the form, this is the mashal for Seviv Mamali. When you learn in Chassidus about the sugi of Seviv Mamali, the mashal that they bring from Mamali is Keiches HaNefesh, and the mashal they bring for Seviv is Ratzon. The mashal they bring for Mamali means the individual faculties of the neshama, the mind, the heart, and the senses. And the mashal they bring for Seviv Kalalman is willpower. So I want to spend the time discussing the difference between the koiches and ratzon, between the faculties and willpower. And the faculties are mashal for Mamala Kalalman, and willpower is a mashal for Seviv Kalalman. Ubagdama. Just a vort, and it's worthwhile to say this vort, even if I have no reason to say it, other than I should share it with you. The Rebbe stopped teaching the Gunim before I was born, which means I never heard the Rebbe teach a nigun. I mean, I was present when the Rebbe taught that as a Munah. In Tafshin Lamadal, I was 8. But I was born at the end of Chafei. I didn't hear the Rebbe teach Nigunim Simchas Teireh, which was the Rebbe teaching a nigun in a very poignant and a very deep way. But I heard from people who were present when the Rebbe taught Nigunim. And one of the things that I heard was that when the Rebbe would teach a nigun, of course it was early in the morning, it's Fatog. It was after Sudas Yom Tov, whatever time it was, 5 in the morning. The Rebbe would come into the Zal. The Rebbe would come into the Beis HaMedrash. And he would get up on a box, and he would say that anybody who is agreeing to make a sofa and nigla and Chassidus is going to give mashke, and the Rebbe would start giving mashke. And when the Rebbe gave mashke, it was like Keishel Bracha, just like by Keishel Bracha. The Rebbe gave wine, they would sing. The Rebbe gave mashke, they would sing. And at a certain point during the singing, the Rebbe would stop and sing a nigun. It was done for 9 years, and it became at a certain point a regular feature of life in Lubavitch. It was just very special, very unusual, special. I heard from people that people came from Crown Heights in those days, Bechlal was not by any means a Lubavitch community, and people got up 5 in the morning for the nigun. It was very special, and it was very, it was deep and personal. It was not a lot of people. Anyway, so I heard from someone who was present that whenever the Rebbe would teach a nigun, the Rebbe would sometimes give an introduction, sometimes he would tell a story, sometimes he would do both, sometimes he would do neither. But before he would actually start to sing, he would stop and he would focus. In other words, there was a proactive moment of ha'akava, of stopping whatever he was doing, and figuratively speaking, in other words, looking at it from the perspective of Das Tachten, he would go into the nigun. He would spend a moment putting himself into, at least this is how it looked, this is the way it was described to me, putting himself into the nigun, and then he would sing the nigun from a deep place. He didn't sing the nigun casually, he was teaching a nigun. And when he taught the nigun, he sang the nigun by being in the nigun. And there was this moment of the word I'm looking for in the light of this Maimonides Hislapshus. He would put himself into the nigun, and he would sing the nigun from a plate of depth. That's how someone described it to me. I also heard from this same person that the Rebbe was very impatient. He wanted us to chop a nigun right away. I mean, the Rebbe would hear a nigun once he knew it. And it would take us 10 times to hear a nigun to know it. And the Rebbe would get very frustrated, and he would laugh about our inability to collect the nigunim. And it's brought into the Shemis, and I heard it from people that the Rebbe used to say, Vu is Yale, and Vu is Meish Talashevsky, the 2 people who got a nigun the quickest were Rabbi Yale, Kanzel Zayn, Gezut, and Shtak Leichsam, Vashanam Davis, and Meish Talashevsky, Alav Hashem, und Zalman Zalange Yor. And the Rebbe would sing the nigun till they got it. And once they got it, the Rebbe stopped singing the nigun, and they would sing it until everybody else got it, and the Rebbe would correct them. And then, of course, the next day, Simchas Torah by the Fabrengen, they would re-sing the nigun, and the Rebbe would sing it again, and correct it again, and explain it again. It was a whole avoid of the nigun. But the point that I'm trying to bring out from this little thought is that the Rebbe, before he sang a nigun, put himself into the nigun. We call this Pnimius. And we also call this Hislapshus. That's chareinlegen in them. You have to put yourself into it. And this really is the trademark of Maamar Lehavin. When Chassidus wants to explain Maamar Lehavin, and Sevav Kalaman, it uses a moshel. The moshel for Maamar Lehavin is keches hanefesh, the faculties of the nefesh. The moshel for Sevav Kalaman is ratzon, is will. What's the difference between the faculties of the neshama and will? The first difference between the faculties of the neshama and will is that every faculty of the neshama has a keli, has a place in the body. There's a part in the body, a specific part in the body that represents it. Mayach HaChochma is the right side of the brain. Mayach HaBina is the left side of the brain. Mayach HaDas is the back of the brain. Chesed is the right arm, and Gevurah is the left arm, or the right side of the heart, and the left side of the heart. Every koyach has a specific place in the body where it's represented, right? Chachgas, Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes is in the heart. Netzach, you say they're in the Nehi. Nehi is the liver, the kidneys, the lower third of the body, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And the way the koiches, where the faculties work, is that the neshama is comprised of tayagmin and keches v'chayes. The neshama in Gan Eden, if you would meet a neshama in Gan Eden, it'd be keich ruchni echad pasha. The neshama in Gan Eden is curled up into a ball, and all you see is a point. But when neshama comes into the guf, that ball opens up. The higher aspects go away, the makifim go away, and the lower aspects split. First they split into three, moyach leiv kaveh, the brain, the heart, and the kidneys, or the liver, and then they split until they split into 613 individual parts. Every single part of the body has a different neshama leh. There's a little piece of life which is distinct for this digit of the pinky, and this digit of the pinky, and this digit of the pinky, because each one of these pieces of the body is an avid, is a limb by itself, because it's made up of basar, gidim, vasam. It has bones, and it has meat, and it has nerves to tie them together, like it's explained in Chassidus. So every piece of the body has a distinct aspect of life that's special for it. In other words, the neshama does not operate like an electric current. An electric current energizes a camera and a light and a computer and a radio with the same energy. And the difference between how the energy is used from one to the next is not about the energy, it's about the machine. When it comes to the neshama, it's not like that. You don't have one basic force of life that gives us life in a lot of different ways based on the different functions of different parts of the body. But rather this koiches, this koyach ha-chochma that goes into moyach ha-chochma. This koyach ha-bina which goes into moyach ha-bina. And this koyach hadas which goes into moyach hadas. Every faculty has a specific place in the body which is designed for it. And there's a harmony, there's a meshing, there's a coming together. There's a chaynei about each individual aspect of the guf. The neshama that goes into that part of the guf coexists, cohabits with that part of the guf, with that koyach, with that chush, in a way of complete oneness, total hislapshus. And of course I want to mention that the koyches would be seichel and midas, the mind and the heart, and the chusha would be seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and touching. It's the same thing. Your eyes have a koyach hariyah haruchni, the power of seeing which is in the neshama. The ears have the koyach hashmiya haruchni, and so on. And in each case, there's a specific neshama, a small piece of life, which is destined for that particular limb or organ, and it sustains it, it gives it life in a very personal way. The koyach hariyah is made for the eye, and the eye is suited for the koyach hariyah. The koyach hashmiya is made for the ear, and the ear is suited for the koyach hashmiya, and so on and so forth. So this is called hislapshus. The neshama meets the guf in a very specialized way. Each piece of the body gets chayes of the neshama in a very personal way. So how does hislapshus work? The way hislapshus works, and of course we could talk about this at great length, but b'klolos, the way hislapshus works is as follows. The neshama is an infinity. The neshama is bli gavul. An infinite soul cannot fit into a finite body. So for the neshama to come into the guf, the neshama has to split, has to divide. The infinite aspects of the neshama become makifim, they go above, and they're what's ratzon and tainig, as we'll see later. And the finite aspects of the neshama, they descend, which is called the koiches, they're going to go into the various limbs of the body. After this initial separation between the higher levels of the neshama, what we'll call chaya yechida, and the lower levels of the neshama, which we're going to call nefesh, ruach, and neshama, there is a further division and a further specialization where each piece of the limited neshama finds its way to the specific aved, the specific organ or limb which is suited for its kind of life. But that's not the end of the story. When the eye receives the koyach hariyah ruchni, the power of vision which the neshama has in Gan Eden. So there's a second split. Besides for the initial separation between what we're calling the infinity of the neshama, the plainness of the neshama, and the finitude of the neshama, the complexity of the neshama, that has parts, tayag minikeches v'chaya, 613 individual aspects, to provide specific and distinct life to different parts of the body. When that particular piece of life, the power to see, for example, goes into the eye, there's another diminution. Because what a neshama is able to see in Gan Eden is far more than a person can see b'gashmias. So there's a second division, besides the division that separates the Ein Seif of the neshama from the gvul of the neshama. Each individual koyach becomes split as it enters into the moyach, or into the ayin, or into the oizen, or into the yad, or into the regel. Every human being is alive. And every human being is alive because the neshama is revealed in his body, in his arms, and in his legs, and in his eyes, and in his heart. His eyes, and in his ears, and in his mind, and in his heart, and so on and so forth. But we're not all the same. Some of us can see better, have stronger eyes. Some of us don't see as well. Some of us can be more intelligent, others can be less intelligent. That determines how much chayis of the nefesh of that particular koyach comes into the Yevid. A person who has a brain which is incredibly refined doesn't get more of the koyach ha-chochma and the koyach ha-bina which is in the neshama. And the person who's simpler, who's not as intelligent, is not going to get as much of the potential to reason and to create and to understand and to analyze and to conclude that the other person is going to get, because if the Avid is not as deep, less of the Chayas remains. So there's two steps, and in each step there's a division. There's a basic division between the Makif and the Pnimi, and then there's a division between the Pnimi itself. Your eye can only see physical things. Your neshama can see spiritual things. In fact, the way it's explained in the Maamar, your neshama can see only spiritual things, it cannot see physical things. And your eye can only see physical things, it cannot see spiritual things. So when the koyach hariyah of the nefesh goes into your eye, there's a huge symptom in that koyach hariyah, because it's being deprived of what it's able to see spiritually, and all that remains is that it can see physically. This process that I just described is called hislapshus. Hislapshus means the neshama goes into the guf and it fits exactly. And whatever of the guf, of the neshama, the guf cannot receive, becomes helam. So they're tailor-made for each other. The neshama of chokhmah goes into the kliyah chokhmah, the neshama of bina goes into the mayach bina, and so on. And the amount of life from the neshama, of that koyach of the neshama that's invested in that organ and that limb and that keli and that ava, depends on its capacity to receive chayes eliki. It's called hislapshus. They become one. Now I mentioned before quickly that one of the aspects of hislapshus is called chaynei seyesatzme, that a living being carries itself. And that has a lot of other ramifications, which I'm not going to touch on at the moment. But one of the ramifications is that when the chayas of the eye goes into the physical eye is not a physical eye that's enlivened with spirituality. He becomes spiritual. When the chayas of the ear goes into the physical ear, it isn't that now you have a physical ear that can hear, but you have a listening entity. In other words, the physical ear becomes the tool for hearing. Because when the neshama and the guf come together in this kind of fusion, which is called hislapshus, where the neshama is revealed in the guf, as opposed to hidden from the guf. And the reason the neshama is revealed from the guf is because the guf is a keli for the neshama, and the neshama goes through its tzimtzumim in order to be nislabish, and there's no klipa, so to speak. So the neshama is revealed in the guf in such a way that the guf becomes neshama-like. I've told this to you in the past, one of the reasons people feel like they're going to live forever, I heard this from one of my mashpiyim, one of the reasons people feel they're going to live forever because the taka are going to live forever. The neshama is eternal, the neshama is immortal, the guf is mortal. And until the person is ill, and he starts to feel his guf, he feels only his neshama. A gesunte fehlt nicht sein guf, the Rebbe told Rabbi after the Rebbe passed away. A healthy person feels only his soul, not his body. And when you feel your soul alone, you feel immortal because the soul is in fact immortal. So when the neshama comes into the guf, there's two-stepped tzimtzum. There's the removal of the makifim and the amshacha of the pnimim, and then there's the removal within the pnimi itself, that each keli and each avish only was able to receive. And the neshama aspect and the guf aspect join in such a pnimiistic way that the guf becomes like a neshama, becomes spirit, becomes living. This is called hislapshus. It's called hislapshus. Hislapshus means the neshama goes into the guf in a perfect way. So it says in Chassidus that every hislapshus involves a hisaskus. That's the way it's articulated. That means if two things meet and they're going to achieve perfect harmony, like imagine two human beings having a relationship, and they're going to have perfect harmony between one another, it doesn't happen in an instant. Hisaskus has to be involved. There's a process that brings the neshama and the guf together in this kind of a pnimiistic way. All hislapshus involves hisaskus. There's a process of the guf being refined to receive the neshama, and there's a process of the neshama becoming more coarse in order to be mislabish in the guf. I saw in a Maamar from Friedrich and Rebbe, when he tries to illustrate this concept of hislapshus and hisaskus, that when the neshama and the guf come together, the harmony is so precise. And in order for this harmony to be so precise, the neshama has to adapt to the guf, and the guf has to adapt to the neshama, and a lot of the neshama gets hidden in the process, and so on and so forth. It's called hisaskus. So he gives a mashal from the physical brain. And he says, the brain has blood. A very high percentage of the energy of the body, I think it's 40% of the energy of the body, nourishes the brain. That means the oxygen and the hemoglobin and so on. And the brain, the blood obviously is hot. The brain is, body temperature is almost 100 degrees. And the blood is also that temperature. And in the brain, the blood evaporates, becomes a vapor, becomes edim, a steam, which means it becomes intangible, which is called ruchni shebagashmi. On the other hand, the neshama adapts itself to the blood to be able to reach the physical of the person, and this is called gashmi sheberuchni, the lowest level of spirituality, which is virtual gashmias. And the ruchni shebegashmi, which is this steam, reaches the gashmi sheberuchni, which is the lowest of the neshama, which is so close to the guf that it's almost guf-like. This is the process of hislapshus. This is the hisaskus for the sake of hislapshus. And that's how hislapshus works. You have different parts of your body. Each one is designed to have a different function. Each part of your body with its distinct function has a different neshama, which is suited for it, a different koyach. And when the koyach and the eva meet, there's a hisaskus and a hislapshus. But there's more. Oh wait, and I just want to say one more thing before I continue. And that is that because there's a hisaskus, there's a shehiyah zman. It takes time. When the neshama comes into the guf, so the harmony between neshama and guf is so precise. But that the harmony of the neshama and guf is a process which is called this askus, the shehiyah zman. It takes time for what the neshama has and what the guf needs to join and become one. So that's 3 points. Yeah, there's the hislapshus, there's the hisaskus, and then there's the shehiyah. It takes time. And now we move on to the next point. And the next point is called hislapshus keach elyon keach tach. In addition to the first idea, that the neshama comes into the guf. And the way the neshama comes into the guf, there's a specific keli, a specific avid, a specific limb or organ which is destined for a particular function of the neshama. And a particular koyach within the nefesh meets that avid and joins with that avid, becomes one with that avid. But that is slapshus, but that is askus, and it takes time. There's also a process of a higher koyach going into a lower koyach. For example, if you use your mind to manage what you teach to another person. So you learn for yourself on one level, you teach to a person on a much lower level, and you have to bring into your awareness the other person's level, the other person's perspective, the other person's limitations, so you should be able to teach them. So there's a hislapshus of koyach elyon keach tachton, which means the way you learn and think for yourself has to come down, and the way you learn and think if you want to teach somebody else. And just like it takes time for the koyach of the nefesh to meet the avid of the guf, to meet your brain, for you to be able to understand in a living way from your own neshama, when it goes down from your learning for yourself to the level of learning for teaching to somebody else, there is an additional process of hislapshus and hisaskus and shehiyah zman. Everybody knows when a teacher teaches, he has to think, he has to plan, he has to prepare. And it's very similar to the idea that I mentioned with the Rebbe. When the Rebbe would teach a nigun, he would pause. And in teaching, this is a fact. If a person is brilliant, and he knows a lot of stuff, and he has to teach students, and he walks into the classroom and begins to speak, it's not going to work. It's not going to work even if he's prepared. There has to be what we call in our culture yesed, a moment of connection between teacher and student. It's described in Tzav. And this moment of pause, this moment of yesed, is the point where the two meet. And this meeting is very important for the harmony that's going to follow. And the same is true within one human being. When you go away from the way you learn for yourself, and you invest yourself in a level where you can be able to teach other people, so there's a great simtsum in that process. Obviously, what you're learning for yourself, you're not going to be teaching to somebody else. But there's also where his hachana and his askus and his slapshus, there's a moment of pause for you to be in the world of the student, to be able to teach to the student. But that's only the first mashal. There's a second mashal. What's the second mashal? The second mashal is the slapshus hameach b'midas, where you understand things in your brain, and then you use your brain to govern how your heart is going to feel. You think about ideas about other human beings, and about kindness, and about love, and you redirect your mayach to think in those terms. So there's a second concept of hislapshus, and this is much lower than the first concept of hislapshus, because the first concept of hislapshus was the koyach elyon keach tachton that are both seichel. The second concept of hislapshus is the koyach elyon keach tachton, where one is seichel, the other is midas. So when ideas that you understand in your brain are going to come down to how you feel them in your heart, and your heart can never feel the subtlety, the nuance, the depth that your brain is able to understand. So there's another hislapshus, that the sophistication of the mind should come down into the raw power, into the simple force that is the human heart, the passions of the human heart. So again, there's a hachana, and there's a saskus, and there's a slapshus. It takes time. You have to prepare yourself, and you have to go down from the way you understand something to understanding how you're going to experience it in emotions. In other words, you cannot articulate, you cannot emote, you cannot express your feelings in your heart just the way you understand them in your brain, because the world can't take it. You have to adapt what you understood in your brain to how not only you feel it in your heart, but how you communicate what you're feeling in your heart to other people. This is called the slapshus of seichel and midas. And it's again the same steps, achonis, askas, slapshus. And you also have shias man. It's even lower than from a Rav to a Talmud. And then there's a third type of slapshus. The third type of slapshus is slapshus of kayach, chokhmah, for example, kayach elyon in chush. When you're an artist, or you're a musician, or you're a choreographer, you have a gift that you can communicate very deep things through the senses. You can make an image which is going to speak, or you can write a piece of music or a piece of poetry that's going to speak, or you're going to perform a dance that's going to speak. The depth and the integrity of those art forms is the human mind. But the human mind was designed for intellect, which is much higher than art and music. And when the human mind goes down from its intellectual space to engage with the faculties of seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and touching, which is the basis for chush, right? The visual arts and the arts associated with music and sound, olfactory and taste and touch. So there's a hislapshus of the brain of the human mind, which understands things in the abstract, as it relates to the different chushim, the various different sensitivities and challenges, sensitivities and chushim, like seeing and hearing, art, dance, music. So they're the same thing. When your brain understands an idea, and then the brain wishes to speak that idea through the art form, you have to invest yourself in it, you have to pause, you have to have a shehiyah, you have to have a hachana, and then you have to have a hisaskos, and then you can have a hislapshus, and what your eye is going to be able to say through the art form. Obviously, you're going to use your hands to make the picture, but the picture is going to speak volumes visually. When another person looks at it, he's going to see not just what you made, but the neshama that's behind it, and that neshama came from your mind. But the way your mind thinks ideas of seichel, alakus, is much higher than your mind, the way it thinks in these art forms. So this is again an example of hislapshus on a lower level. And the last level of hislapshus, which is brought in Maamar Chassidishe, is when you throw a ball, but in a particular direction with a particular intent. Right? You can throw a ball haphazardly, randomly. You can throw a ball with your left hand, of which you have very little control. And you can throw a pitch. You can throw a ball with very great preciseness. So again, your brain has to be hislapshus in your hand to focus and to concentrate on the distance and the speed and the point that you want to read. And you have to take into consideration the curvature of the earth and the force of gravity and the interference of wind and other factors, so that you should reach your target the way you want to reach it. This again is an example of hachana, his askus, and his slapshus, the way your brain and your mind is going to communicate to your arm that you should throw and reach a particular target involves a lot of tzimtzum upon what the brain is able to understand by itself. And it works with that slapshus, that in your arm, as you throw the ball, there is not just the force of the hand, there's the intelligence. This is called slapshus. This is how the koyches work. This is how the neshama comes into the guf on a level of a malak halalman. And this is how a higher koyach comes into a lower koyach on a level of a malak halalman. And the rule is always that it has to take time. Has to take time. It doesn't matter how often you do it, it has to take time. Now I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, but let's move on to the other model. What's the other model? The other model is will. Willpower. Willpower, according to Chassidus, is infinite. And willpower, according to Chassidus, is higher than reason. Willpower, well, the reason is not really willpower because it's the will that is generated by logic. So what motivates a person's will? Their essence, their neshama, their personality, their behus, makes them want certain things because these desires, these wants, go to their very core. Just like every human being needs to be alive, and that's a will, which you can't rationalize. Every human being has certain things that they want on a level of ma'ala min haseichel. Now the way will works is as follows. Number one, there is no organ in the body that represents will. There's no place in the body that wills. There's no arm or leg or eye or ear that's representative of the koyach of a ratzon. So will is nowhere. But because will is nowhere, will is everywhere. Will is the overriding force. It comes into your brain and tells them what to learn. It comes into your eye and tells them what to see. It comes into your heart and tells them what to feel. It comes into your eye and tells them what art to enjoy. Now for will to tell you what to enjoy is also possible, but it's a very deep inyan has to do with the high badreg of das, a ganze Geschichte, which is discussed in Samach Vov, near the end. But that's how willpower operates. The will does not have a place in the body. And there's no hachana, there's no isaskus, there's no islapshus, there's no steps, there's no process. It's a force. Will is stronger than you, and it bullies you. It wears you down. It makes you do what it wants. So if you're busy enjoying a dvar seichel, and your will says now you have to get up from this book and go out into the world and experience a regesh or a chush or a tevet hanatzveiten, your will is stronger than your faculties and your koyches. And like I said before, there's no limb, there's no organ in the body which is a representative of will. And therefore will is nowhere and will is everywhere. The willpower of a person pushes a person to do things that don't want to, or to push people beyond what their comfort zone, or to go in directions we're not planning to go in. And the will does it without his lapshus. Will does not have rachmanis. Will's not a nice guy. He's a powerful person. And he pushes. Which leads to another point about will. That will operates, as the Maamar said, believe man takes no time. When you tell your body, move your arm, the arm moves. It's spontaneously, instantaneously. There's no passage of time. Why? Because since will does not have a particular place in the body, will is everywhere in the body. And I've been asked by people, and this isn't Tanya, Perikov Gimel, and it's mentioned here as well. It's in a lot of places in Chassidus when they bring the mashal for Ratzon, they say this idea, when willpower makes you move your arm, it moves. Take it from a yad takes no time at all. And of course they ask the question, we know that will has to do with electromagnetism, right? It's communication, messages from the brain to the spine to the arm and back. It takes fractions of a second because energy travels at 186,000 miles a second, and the whole body of a human being is a few feet. But nevertheless, how could Chassidus say that it's spontaneous, that it's instantaneous? And the answer is, what doesn't happen instantaneously is the electromagnetic process. When your will makes your arm move, it is simultaneously telling your brain to tell your arm to move using electromagnetism, electricity. The physical side of it takes time because all physical things are finite. But that physical act comes from a spiritual superimposition of will over the arm, and the will itself, the life of want, as it relates to that arm, happens, believe man, it happens spontaneously. It's only that because it's beslapshus and the goof, in the sense that everything that happens spiritually happens in a parallel way physically, and physically the brain and the heart are connected through neurons, through electricity, so there's a passage of time. But philosophically, at least, the will controls the body so long as the body is healthy, and it operates spontaneously, automatically. And I want to explain this to you. I want to develop this, okay? And I'll give you a number of examples. Writing versus drawing, talking versus singing, walking versus dancing, and I can give you more examples. What's the difference between a person writing words or speaking words and drawing a picture or singing a song? What's the difference between a person talking versus a person singing? What's the difference between a person walking and a person dancing? And of course the obvious answer is when a person draws a picture, plays music, sings a song, dances, writes poetry, what they're producing is very beautiful. As opposed to a person who's writing or talking or walking. It's not beautiful, it's natural, so people do it without any hesitation. That's obviously the difference. But it's not just a difference of degree, it's a completely different event. It's a totally different phenomenon, and I'll tell you how. When a baby is born, they can't walk, they can't talk. right? They can't walk, they can't talk, they can't write. They perhaps can't even see very well. They learn these things. But the body of the human being was designed that you should learn these things in such a way that they become instinctual, that you should do them without thinking about it. We were designed to walk and not pay attention to our steps. A human being who walks and pays attention to his steps is sick. We were designed to talk and not pay attention to our words. A person who pays attention to his words, there's something wrong with him. We were designed to write and not worry about our handwriting, even though we should worry about our handwriting, because we're supposed to write naturally. And if a person's too caught up in this, it prevents them from writing and from walking and from talking and from singing. You do it naturally. You learn it, and once you learn it, it becomes a basic part of who you are, because it was always a basic part of who you are. So you do it without paying attention. You do it without any effort. A human being is not supposed to work hard to say words. Even though when you're 2 years old, you're learning how to talk by saying the same words over and over and over again until you distort them and you disfigure them and you create new words and so on. And the same is when a person walks. If he's only healthy, he walks without thinking about it, and the rest is the same as with all the other koiches and chush. The Rebbe once told a story by Fabrengen. I heard it from my father, and I think it's also when you get a Sakedish and Igris, the Mechtavim Klolium, and I'd love to see it. I think I saw it in the Psyche, but I want to see the Rebbe's source, if everybody knows where the Rebbe took it from. The Rebbe said there was a professor of anatomy, of human anatomy, who did a thought experiment. What was the nature of his thought experiment? The nature of his thought experiment was that he decided that he's not going to move his body until he concentrates on it. He understood and knew how many steps, how many communication events happen between the brain decides to move the hand until the hand moves. And he decided that he's not going to move his hand until he mentally, deliberately goes through the steps from the brain to the, whatever it's called, the cerebellum, the back of the skull, and then to the spine, and then to the arm, and so on. And he conditioned himself to do everything deliberately. All the things you do and don't think about, he did deliberately. And when he was done with his experiment, he couldn't walk. He lost his ability to walk. And he had to be retaught how to walk like a 2-year-old, like a child. This is the story that the Rebbe said. I think I saw it in a Psyche, but the Rebbe wrote it also in a Mechtov Klali. If anybody knows where it is or what's the source of the Rebbe, please feel free to share. Or please be so kind and share. Now think about that. A person decided to be deliberate and conscious about things that human beings do nonchalantly, with no awareness, no consciousness, naturally, passively, with no effort. And he became what he was trying to accomplish. He lost his ability to do these things naturally. According to Chassidus, the explanation for this event is this. We do not talk from our brain, we talk from our will. We do not walk from our legs, we walk from our will. The things that the Eibishter conditioned human beings to do, without paying any attention, we do instinctively. And they come from a passive place. They come from an instinctual place. They're not supposed to come from the conscious mind. They're supposed to come from the unconscious mind. And if you choose to be deliberate about it and do it consciously, you lose that gift. Hashem made it that until you're 2, you cannot speak. And when you're 2, you have to learn to speak. And once you learn to speak, you speak without any effort. Period. Why? Because you're not speaking from your mind, you're speaking from your will. Ideas take time to develop, because ideas come from the brain. You have to think about ideas, and you have to plan how you're going to say the ideas. But the words, they tumble out of you effortlessly, just like steps in a healthy person. And just like the words written out by a healthy human being. In every aspect of our lives, there is a dimension that we do without thinking about it, because it comes directly from the subconscious, which is basically Ratz. In other words, will on the one hand is incredibly powerful for us, and will on the other hand is reflex and instinct. Those things that you do, b'li achana, b'li yisaskus, b'li yislapshus, those things that you do without processing them at all. You just do them. They're coming from a place in the neshama which is not b'yislapshus in the goof. There's no part of the goof that this is in. And the flip side of that, of course, is if you make the same piece of art 1,000 times, if you sing the same piece of music, or you play the same piece of music, or you do the same dance 1,000 times, if you are a real artist, Every single time you pause and you focus and you concentrate and you perform. And each time there's a new investment of mind and heart in what you're doing. There's never, I'm so good at it I can do it with my eyes closed. There's no such thing. You can walk with your eyes closed. You can talk with your eyes closed. You can't sing. And if you sing without focusing, you're not singing, and it sounds that way. It sounds poor. It sounds deficient. It sounds lacking. Why? Because the things that we do without any attention come from the subconscious, come from the rotz, come from the will. The Eibusha designed us to have this deeper power that's not in a particular place in the body, and therefore it's all over the body, and it unifies the body, so to speak, and the body responds to it instantaneously. Believe man, virtually no passage of time, almost spontaneously. Like I said, Chassidus says it's actually spontaneously, but from the point of view of electricity, it takes a few chveisvas, hundreds of thousands of a second, for the communication to happen, because it's not conscious. But when you sing, when you draw, when you dance, when you write prose, when you write poetry, you concentrate, even if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, because each time there's a process of hislapshus. What's the hislapshus? The brain to the arms, the brain to the eyes, the brain to the heart, the brain to the legs, and so on and so forth. And this is the mashal that explains Memale Kalalman and Save of Kalalman. Memale Kalalman would be the process of the neshama coming into the guf b'hachana b'hislapshus or b'hisaskus, which has a shehiyah zman, the neshama coming into the body, and then a higher part of the neshama descending to a lower part of the neshama through a very deliberate and precise process. And the way Chassidus explains it is that when you're drawing, there's oir haseichel in your arm b'hislapshus. When you're singing, there's oir haseichel in your mouth b'hislapshus. When you're dancing, there's oir haseichel on your feet b'hislapshus. And when you're walking, and when you're talking, and when you're writing, there is none of that. I've told this to you once before. I mean, as I'm talking, I'm realizing that we've had this conversation in earlier years, but it's okay to repeat periodically. We were kids. The Lubavitcher boys went to Los Angeles for the summer. Tafshel Lamates, right? They recently celebrated the 40th anniversary of the yeshiva, Erechon Chabad, which I have very deep roots and a lot of Akaras Hateif too. So we were kids, we went for the summer, took us to Disneyland. In those days, by Yom Mahim, Disneyland was different than it is today. Today you go to Disneyland, you get a wristband, you pay, $50, and you run around all day long. We got tickets. And you wanted to maximize the tickets. You had 1A ticket, 2B tickets, 3C tickets, 4D tickets, and 5E tickets. And E tickets were the best, and A tickets were the worst. So you had to spend your A ticket, and you could either spend it on a horse ride on Main Street, or you can spend your A ticket to walk into an auditorium, into a theater, and Abraham Lincoln would stand up and make the Gettysburg Address. Now, Abraham Lincoln was a machine that was designed by Walt Disney, the basic concept. It was a machine that was designed to function like an organic being. So uns yeshiva bacharim climbed into this gathered in this auditorium, and Abraham Lincoln is sitting. They put up a curtain, and he stands up, and the Gettysburg Address. It's a few minutes, a short little speech, but it's incredible because it's really, really well done. This machine moves its arms, it blinks, it nods its head, it turns from time to side. It literally looks like a real human being making a speech. And we sat there in the back of this room trying to show proof that it's a machine and not a person. And there was no aspect of what this machine did that was deliberate, that was proactive, that was imprecise. The place where you saw that it was a machine was in the passive motion. Yeah, you raise your hand, yeah? You raise your hand, that's an action, yeah? And then you lower your hand. If that Abraham Lincoln had dropped his hand like that, it would have fallen off. So it went down like this. And this is where we, Yeshiva Bacharim, found, it's a machine, it's not a person. Because human beings do a lot of things passively. They're not doing them, they happen. Now, how could anything happen that you're not doing? And the answer is that comes from will. The neshama has a level that allows you to function without proactivity. And that's the two sides of will. Yeah, one side of will is the power, it's stronger than you. And the other side of will is it takes you over in such a way that these are things that happen by themselves. A machine can never do something without a conscious effort. Whoever built the machine builds into the machine that it should go up, and then has to separately build into the machine that it should go down. Only a human being can raise his hand and then just drop it. Because he's not lowering his hand, he stopped raising it. This is a unique faculty that a living being has, not because of the hislapshus of the koiches and the neshama and the guf, but the ratzon, willpower. And those are the two aspects of will. A, that it's stronger than the body and it forces the body. And B, that it makes the body function as a unit, as a whole, as a single entity in a way that's passive. And these mishalim of hislapshus and ratzon, first of all, they're the neshama coming into the guf. And second of all, they have a koyach and coming into koyach tachten. And the idea that there's always a focus, always a moment of hesitation and pause. Hachona is askus hislapshus. For these koyches, for a higher koyach and a lower koyach to meet, this is a mashal from a male kol alman, that the chayes aliki comes into the world and is specialized in a tailored way. On the other hand, the will and the instinct, the reflex, which is really what makes us living, organic, as opposed to being machines, this is a mashal for save of kol alman. That it affects everything, but it's not felt any place. The will has incredible influence on you. If we didn't have reflex, we would be in very big trouble. But the reflex happens passively. We don't do it, it happens. We have will, it's very powerful, but you don't experience the power of the will, you just experience the effect. I will myself into doing this, and you do it even though it's hard for you, and so on. And that's a mashal for save of kalamim, which is everywhere, but it's in a hidden way. So it took us a very long time to read 20 lines, because I decided to use this opportunity to give you my Mamali and Save of lecture. I believe I've given it before, but it's been a while. And in the next year, we'll learn the Maamar about Pesach.